You ever stop and think about where plastic actually comes from? I'm not talking about a recycling plant. I mean the very beginning. The moment someone dreamed up a material that nature had never, ever seen. Well, today, we're diving into the story of an invention that didn't just change an industry, it literally created the plastic age.
I mean, really think about that for a second. You're not just finding something like wood or stone and shaping it. You're building an entirely new substance, atom by atom, to do exactly what you want it to do. It sounds like something straight out of science fiction, right?
Well, it turns out it wasn't fiction at all. Way back in 1907, in a private lab just outside New York City, one inventor decided to take on that exact challenge. And what he came up with, this stuff called Bakelite, was the world's first truly synthetic plastic. And its impact, well, it would ripple through absolutely every part of modern life. Okay, let's get into it. So, to really get why Bakelite was such a massive deal, you gotta understand the world it was born into. It was a world buzzing with incredible new technology, but it was being held back by one single, surprising problem. Electricity was transforming everything, right? From factories to people's homes. But there was a catch. All that new wiring, all those new machines, they needed good insulation, a material that could handle heat and stop electricity in its tracks. And the problem was, the best material they had for the job, they were running out of it, fast. The go-to material was a stuff called shellac. And get this, it's a resin that comes from the secretions of these tiny little lac bugs in Southeast Asia. Yeah, so as you can imagine, getting enough of it was a total nightmare. The supply was all over the place, and it was super expensive. What industry was desperate for was a synthetic replacement, something you could just crank out in a factory that was cheap, reliable, and a perfect insulator every single time. And this is where our main character, Leo Baekeland, steps onto the stage. Now, this guy wasn't some tinkerer who just got lucky. Oh no. He was a brilliant, methodical scientist who looked at this massive industrial problem and thought, yeah, I can solve that. Bakeland was a Belgian chemist who had already proven he was a genius. He'd invented Velox, the first commercially successful photographic paper, a real game changer. So forget any image of a starving artist in a garage. This guy was already a well-funded scientist with a very clear, very ambitious goal: to design the perfect man-made substitute for shellac. And when I say well-funded, I am not kidding. He sold his Velox patent to Eastman Kodak for a cool $1 million back in 1899. That's about $30 million in today's money. And he used that cash to build his own personal state-of-the-art lab to tackle this one specific problem. Now, other chemists had tried to make resins using the same basic chemicals, vanille and formaldehyde, but they always ended up with this useless, sticky, uncontrollable mess. Bakeland's real breakthrough wasn't the ingredients, it was in mastering the process. And what he created was Bakelite. And this is the key. It was the first fully synthetic plastic. You see, earlier materials like celluloid were still made from natural stuff, like cotton. Bakelite? Nope. It was built from the ground up, using simple molecules that had absolutely no connection to the natural world. So, the secret sauce wasn't the recipe, it was the technique. He realized that to create a stable, moldable material, he had to figure out how to tame the wild chemical reaction happening between his two main ingredients. And his patented process was just pure genius. He figured out how to hit pause on the reaction at this crucial intermediate point. He called it the A stage, where the resin was still soft and workable. Then, he could mix it with a filler, like wood flour, put it in a mold inside this machine he invented called a bakelizer, and then apply intense heat and pressure. And that forced the final reaction, creating the permanent, rock-hard C-stage plastic that, once it's set, you could never, ever melt again. And with this incredible, controllable, revolutionary process, Bakeland unleashed a material that was about to find its way into every single corner of modern life. It didn't just shape industry, it shaped culture itself. The early ads called it the material of 1,000 uses. And you know what? That wasn't even an exaggeration. This wasn't just a substitute for shellac anymore. It was something completely new, and it could do almost anything. And man, was it everywhere. Suddenly, this sleek, durable material was being molded into everything. We're talking radio cabinets, telephone handsets, beautiful Art Deco jewelry, car parts, kitchenware, billiard balls, and yep, even coffin handles. It totally democratized design. A regular family could now afford beautiful objects that looked just like expensive ivory or tortoiseshell. And it had a look, its signature dark, glossy colors, mostly those deep blacks and rich browns. They basically became the aesthetic of the 1920s and 30s. When you picture a streamlined, curvy radio from that era, you are picturing Bakelite. But here's the twist in the story. Bakelite's most celebrated quality, the fact that it was so incredibly durable, would eventually cast a very long shadow, forcing us to deal with the unforeseen consequences of creating something that nature simply can't break down. Bakeland himself was incredibly proud of this. He boasted that he'd created a material that would last forever. In his eyes, he had achieved a kind of perfection. It was resistant to heat, electricity, chemicals. What could be better? And this is the very question that kind of haunts us today. What happens when a material designed to never break down gets thrown away? Suddenly, your perspective just flips. Its greatest strength suddenly looks like its most challenging legacy. So Bakelite's legacy is really two-sided. On the one hand, it was this massive triumph of ingenuity. It proved that humans could become, as Bakeland himself said, architects of molecules. But it also opened Pandora's box. The very permanence that made it a miracle material in 1907 makes it an environmental burden that fills our landfills today. From its invention in '07, through its peak as a symbol of modernity in the '30s, to its eventual replacement by newer plastics after World War II, Bakelite's story is kind of the story of the 20th century in miniature. Today, it exists as both a prized collector's item and the very first chapter in our ongoing global plastic crisis. So, the story of Bakelite leaves us right here. Bakeland brilliantly solved a huge problem for his time, but in doing so, he created a whole new challenge for our time. It forces us to ask, when we create something that never existed in nature, what is our responsibility for its entire life cycle, especially when that life cycle is forever?